In a world where God is dying, 4 heathens come to deliver the final nails in the coffin. From the depths of hell, Satan sends 4 puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists from the Middle East.
Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome to another episode of Secular Jihadists from the Middle East. I always have to catch myself because I'm about to say sexual jihadists, but it's not sexual, it's secular.
It's after hours podcast.
It's a Freudian slip.
Oh, God.
This is a terrible way to start this show. I'm sorry, guys. I'm recovering from a cold.
No, don't. This is how you always.
No excuse for that.
I mean it sincerely. Like I am dedicated to this. I mean it from the heart of my bottom. So here we have the usual, our usual co-hosts, the usual suspects. We've got Yasmin Mohammed, who is she writes at Confessions of an Ex-Muslim.com, and she has a book coming out called From Al-Qaeda to Atheism. And there's a reason it's called that is because Yasmin was actually formerly married into Al-Qaeda, and that's a really it's a really amazing story that, if you hear the very first episode of Secular Jihadists, she talks about it in detail over there, so you should check that out. Hi, Yaz, how are you?
Hi, Ali. Thank you.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. I missed you guys.
I know, I miss you too. It's been a week, but still, we do. We like each other a lot. And then we also have Armin Navabi. Armin Navabi, as we know, is the founder of Atheist Republic, which is the largest online platform for atheists in the world with over 1.7 million followers. He's also the author of the Amazon bestseller, Why There Is No God, which is consistently, just for almost, how long has it been? 2-3 years now?
I'm not sure. I have to check. Yeah, but well.
Still going strong. It's a fantastic book. So it's a book actually that Richard Dawkins asked Armin to sign for him.
Yeah,
that Armin dropped, and Armin's face was just like his jaw dropped to the floor. That happened. I was there. I saw it happen. Yeah. So hi, Armin. Hope you're well.
Hi. Thank you.
All right, and today we're going to be speaking to Katie. She's our guest for today. And Katie, the interesting thing about you is that you are an admitted former regressive leftist, correct?
That's right.
So regressive left, for those who are not familiar with the term, who wants to explain it?
You go ahead. You tell us what it is.
I've already talked a lot.
All right. Is your throat getting sore? Okay, I'll go. I'll try. So regressive left is a term that was coined by Maajid Nawaz to describe people that are so far on the left that they are no longer progressive, they're actually regressive. And so it's people that are also commonly referred to as SJWs or social justice warriors. Or nowadays we just call them like far lefties or lefty crazies, libtards.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So does that all describe who you were, Katie?
Pretty much. Yeah. I was I'll get memories on my Facebook from things I posted a couple years ago, and pretty embarrassing stuff.
You're cringing at yourself. Did you ever support Hijab Day? Because that's...
You know what? I don't remember specifically like a day of celebration, but I do remember being like ridiculously like coming to bat for that sort of shit all the time. So.
Can you give us some examples of the things that you believed in that you don't believe in? Yeah.
So like for a while I started to think that like white people were actually like a curse on the world. And I was starting to actually feel really bad about myself. I was like, okay, well, I was reading like, what are those websites? There's all those websites, they post stupid articles like bustle.com and like Salon and all those like super, and they post things about like how white people should just like shut up like all the time. Like they've got no place to speak about.
Dear white people.
Yeah.
Like usually AJ Plus does a lot of that stuff too.
I know, like every online media outlet is just like, they're all drinking the Kool-Aid now. So.
Yeah, I saw it. Like recently I saw something about, there's this guy who actually writes for, I think he writes for the New York Times. Or, I don't want to say if I'm not sure, but a major paper. And he wrote something like, interracial dating is one thing. But no, he said interracial dating is okay, but dating a white person is a whole other thing. And I thought that was amazing. It just, this stuff is so bad. I mean, it's one thing to talk about the history of colonialism or whatever you want to talk about. I mean, those are topics.
Yeah.
But to actually make it about, once you start going into the whole white thing and start bringing it down to skin color, you're violating Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote. Yeah. About the content of their character, of people's characters.
There was a New York Times guy who wrote, or girl, I don't actually know, who wrote an article titled, "Would I let my my kid be friends with white people?"
I saw that. That's insane. Yeah, I saw that. That was just like last week.
Right. It just makes things worse. I mean, if you want to say that, okay, right now the atmosphere has gotten, like it's so racially divisive that there are things that we need to look out for. That's a whole different thing. But to say that I don't know if I'm going to have my kid be friends with white people, it's insane. But go ahead, Katie.
That's just
part of the racial division that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's like advocating segregation. Like there's something really disturbed about being like, no, you can't be. I don't know. I don't think it's the way to go.
So, but Katie, what's wrong with acknowledging the dark history of a certain group of people and, the crimes they have committed and the injustices they have done to large groups of people? What is wrong with recognizing that as part of, you could celebrate accomplishments of some group of people, but what's wrong with also acknowledging that there was a lot of bad things that a group of people have done and accepting that as part of your history and, trying to correct it?
There's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, that's good. We shouldn't pretend that, it's always been roses and whatever. But I think it comes to a point where when you're like shaming people daily for things that they personally didn't have a part in. I mean, it's fine to be like, yeah, your ancestor did some really fucked up things and whatever. But to be like, yeah, and now I have sort of a reason to hate you for it. It just seems kind of silly.
But is that really what they're saying? Are they saying that we should hate white people, or are they just saying that white people should acknowledge this as part of their history and they should also be part of the solution and be responsible for being part of the solution by accepting that this is part of their history?
Well, I guess that depends who you talk to, because reasonable people do just that. They say, this is what happened and we should talk about, all these issues, but they're not going around and, throwing it in people's faces all the time. That's totally, that's acceptable. And that's actually probably a good way to go about talking about these things. But, this whole sort of like, I'm going to guilt trip you and, and I'm going to like hold this like privilege that you have, over your head every time that, I just, it's counterproductive. I don't see it as a good way to move forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think any group of people on this planet are innocent. Every group of people have, in some way or another, have atrocities in their past. So, and also none of us are immune to it either. So there's this idea that, no, I totally agree with you. Like there's this idea that it can only go from white people to other groups, right? To people of color, because everybody else on the planet is another group other than white people, which what's more divisive than that, first of all?
Kidding. Yeah.
But even within that too, like there's this idea that it's only unidirectional, but it's not. It's multi-directional. So people of color are racist and oppressive to each other all the time and towards white people too. And it goes in all directions. And it's just it's human nature, unfortunately.
Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. I was just going to say that, is inherent in every culture, like there's always going to be some very nasty people. Yeah. It's not like, it doesn't even make sense to think that, and yeah, I've heard people say that, you know, these cultures never did this stuff until white people, since humanity, people have been, you know, murdering, raping, doing all sorts of things. So
I feel like that's bigotry and low expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like they're not, developed enough to do bad things, or like, what are you saying?
Brown people know how to be racist too. They also know how to be assholes. They're pretty good at it. So what helped you to get out of that? How did you leave your white guilt behind, or this whole self-flagellation that's pretty common these days? How did you work through that? Do you remember?
Right. So a big part of it was I started watching like Blair White videos and kind of opening my eyes to different perspectives, not just the, you know, the Facebook, like whatever stupid page it is posting, you know, informational videos in a 60-second clip. And also kind of like, okay, so my dad is really like conservative dude, right? And when I was younger, we used to always like, you know, bicker about, you know, he's like voted for the Conservative Party, and I was always like, oh, NDP and whatever. And he always kind of instilled like deep down, even though I was like kind of being superbly regressive and white guilty and all that stuff. I still had sort of the sense of like, you know, the world doesn't really like judge people on their character and their merit, not because of this and this and this. And I kind of still had that, you know, at the back of my mind. And then when I started to see how toxic it was getting, you know, when I started to realize like, I'm starting to feel really bad about myself all the time. I was like, maybe this isn't, you know, that good of a thing. Like if I'm starting to be like, oh, I'm just like, I started to feel really small, like not, you know, not like I should have, I don't know. I just felt like, I guess, like a burden kind of, because that's what I was kind of reading a lot and stuff. And I guess maybe I'm just sensitive. Some people would just read it and be like, oh, whatever. Like, I don't care. But I was like absorbing it like a sponge.
No, I totally get that. I read an article where somebody called it, the original sin, like to be born white.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of like some people that I know that grew up in conservative, like fundamentalist Christian communities who were gay, and they knew that they were gay, but all day long they're hearing about how gay people are an abomination, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a self-hate that starts to grow inside of you. And I feel like if you're telling any group of people constantly negative things about their identity, things that they can't change, you know, that's the way they are. Like if you keep on talking about how white people are this and white people are that, white people are like, there's nothing I can do about that. It's like, it's the way I was born and I didn't do any of those things. And it sort of puts you in this helpless position where you have no option but to just start to hate on yourself.
Yeah. And that's also, it's like, it's so funny because like with the social justice warriors, you really can't win because if you don't speak up, you're just too privileged to care about politics or whatever. And if you do, they call it performative allyship. So they're saying that you're doing it just to look good. So it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw an Antifa woman yelling at this white guy, telling him, why are you just yelling at him? You need to go punch him. Go punch him. You're not really being an ally. And the guy's like, I'm trying not to get arrested. Oh and she's like, fuck you. You're not a real ally.
Oh my God. What a stupid bitch. I'm not surprised though. Like, I mean, I see stuff like that on the internet all the time. So,
one of the things that I've seen online, that I'm not as involved in these, the whole, you know, the culture war thing. And I'm not as familiar with the YouTubers, except I know that Lacey Green recently went through a bit of a transition when it came to that.
Yeah.
And I liked her actually many, many years ago. I think it was in 2007 or 2000, no, maybe later sometime, that she made this video and she was really young about atheism, about why do atheists care about religion? And it was actually a fantastic video. And that's how I got to know her. But, and then after that, just dropped out, lost interest. And then recently, like, she didn't come back up again. Right? So, but I guess my question is that, what I see is I see a lot of polarization. So I'll see, for instance, you'll have people on the SJW side, and a lot of the stuff that they say is complete bullshit. And then you'll see people on the polar opposite side, and a lot of stuff they say is complete bullshit, but both of them also have certain points that make sense. Are there still some things from the SJW or that side that you had that you think, where you think that they did have a point that's lacking on the other side, or do you think it's just all bad?
I think, they definitely are right. Like, I mean, to say that racism and those things don't exist, that would just be bullshit, because all those things, the things that they speak about are definitely out there in the world. I think that sometimes they nitpick a bit too much to find problems, but there definitely are, there's a lot of hatred in the world. There's no doubt about that. And I've noticed that since I've kind of moved a little more right, I've actually encountered a lot of people who kind of want to pretend that they're wrong about everything. And it's just not so. Then it's a slippery slope. You start dealing with people who believe in race realism and stuff. And it's like, okay, I don't want any part of your shit either.
Yeah, that's what I think that's kind of what I was getting at, because I know that, you mentioned Blair White. I don't know that much about her, but there are a couple of things that she has said about, I'll give you an example of, for example, the whole trans thing, right? You have on one side, on the far left, you have people saying that there are, 72 different gender pronouns, and there's all these genders, I don't know, vegetarian genders, and I don't know what all of this stuff that just totally goes over my head, and there's no scientific basis for. Then on the other hand, I have this other side saying that, just being transgender is not a real thing. It's completely fake. It's not, which is also not true, because there's no, that's also not true.
That's not true. That's just not true.
And this is, so my biggest problem with the polarization is that you have this view or that view, and I see especially a lot of young people. I'm an old guy, so I see a lot of young people sort of gravitating towards one side or the other. And I just, when I'm there's stuff that we have evidence for, right? There's the transgenderism has actually been recognized for a very long time. It used to be called gender identity disorder, and now people say it's not a disorder, and it's a whole different thing, the normal way to be. Yeah. And then, but on the other hand, you have this insane sort of non-binary, the spectrum where all this other stuff is coming in. So, and I think, you mentioned Blair White. Blair White's one of those people who's very rigid on the whole two gender thing. And I guess my question is that when you hear somebody like Blair White, or you have, YouTube videos of people like that, are these people you completely agree with and you think, okay, they're right on everything, or do you have reservations about it too?
Oh, no. I don't, I love her, but there have been things I've disagreed with about, and, I don't think there's anyone, that I would fully agree with on everything. But definitely sometimes, it's kind of two extremes, and it's really hard to kind of find somewhere in the middle. A good example of that is I have a friend whom I love, and I hope doesn't watch this now because of what I'm about to say. But he was telling, he's super far right. He's not like a racist or anything like that. But he's super almost, I want to say, a bit pipe dreamish. It doesn't really work that much. But some of his ideals, I don't really agree with. But he was starting to tell me that the morning after pill is the same thing as an abortion and all this stuff. And I was just like, whoa, I was like, this is too much for me. This isn't even true. And then he linked me to an opinion, piece from a Life site or some obviously very biased. It was an opinion piece. It wasn't peer reviewed science talking about
birth site. Not pro-life or forced birth sites, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Okay, pro-birth, because they often don't give a shit once the kid's born.
But yeah, I hear you completely.
It's whoa, I just want to hide back in my hole now. Everybody sucks.
Yeah, okay. So, Armin, you had a couple of questions. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, but also after that, there's two questions from our patrons that we should address to. But my own question is that, so when you say other people could be racist as well, it's not just white people, right? But what if somebody comes and says, yeah, I know I know there's a lot of racism in other countries, but I want to address racism in my own community. That's why I focus on racism from among, white people, because I see it a lot. I'm exposed to it a lot in countries where I am, in the country that I live. That's a bigger problem for me. If you're in China, maybe you care about Chinese racism against the Japanese people. But now I'm in the US, so that's why I'm talking about white racism, right? And also, what if somebody says, I'm not saying all white people are guilty, but there is a privilege. There is a privilege that comes with it. Maybe not every white person is benefiting from it, but there's a systematic, racism against other groups of people that gives white people a heads up. There is an advantage to being white. And that disadvantage that all these other minorities have is small compared to when you say white people, feeling guilty or white guilt, like the complaints about white guilt and, this is abuse towards white people. Some people say okay, yeah, that exists and it goes overboard sometimes, but the amount of harm that does to white people is very small compared to the amount of discrimination that the other minorities get in countries like United States. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that obviously there is, I think that the privilege thing, it's very much dependent on where you live. And in like Canada, the US, yes, white people are the majority. So I think that definitely, yeah, there's definitely favorable treatment. I mean, I just know I have friends. Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. If you have money, I've always said that I think that people are more divided by class than they are because if you think about it, right, like there might be, some upper middle class people and their friends might be all sorts of, ethnicities and whatever. And then it would be the same thing in like a poor neighborhood.
Like in Vancouver, it's the Persians, Armin. You guys are the privileged ones.
Well, we are Aryans, so it's the same thing.
Well, yeah. And if you look at the downtown east side, it's a mixture of different, people of different ethnic backgrounds. It's not just there's white people too. And
I think what you're saying basically, just so we can maybe conclude this race thing, is that you're saying that it's not that these issues don't exist. They exist everywhere and they should be identified in all different communities. And it's not that they don't exist, but it's sometimes people focus on them as if it's the only thing that exists. It's the only racism. And that's when it starts to, I think that's the line between progressive and regressive right there. I think there's a lot of really great things about the progressive movement, but then it reaches a tipping point. Like it just goes too far. Like I call it like going on steroids. It's like tolerance. Being tolerant is fantastic. But then once you start becoming tolerant of things you shouldn't be tolerant of, you've crossed the line from progressive into regressive.
Yeah, definitely. That's absolutely it. I mean, like I said, racism, homophobia, all those things are definitely very real issues that plague society. But there's good ways to go about it and there's bad ways to go about it. And,
Mm-hmm. And when you say something like, this is why I'm not going to let my kids be friends with white people, that's not a good way to go about it.
No, that's just not. It's just not.
Look,
it's very toxic for children.
Right. I mean, this is a real. I always think about this in the sense that when you had the election when Trump won, and these manufacturing states, there were a lot of people who were, they're losing their jobs because they're getting automated or outsourced. The suicide rates are high, depression rates are high. And there are a lot of sort of white people who are unemployed and they're, turning to drugs and all these things. And then they see a guy who looks like me at Harvard going up and saying, white privilege is terrible. And they're going to be like, well, fuck you. I'm voting for Trump.
Yeah.
Right. But then on the other hand, you have Trump who got elected. But if Obama had, 5 kids from 3 wives, or if he had said, grab him by the pussy on a bus, there's no way in hell a black guy would have gotten elected that way. So that part of racism is alive. So, there are both these issues, and to talk about them as if it's only one or the other is just not acknowledging what the reality is. And it is confusing because it's a very complicated time. You know, you have all of these different groups, and I'm sort of thinking it's more of a class issue. It's actually, I've always thought it's really more of a class issue now. It's metamorphosizing from a race issue into a class issue.
They're connected, though, aren't they? I mean, one of them
that's what makes it so
one.
confusing. That's what makes it so confusing, because a lot of the people who are losing their manufacturing jobs, a lot of the working class people who they say, brought in the whole Trump revolution. I mean, these are also, a lot of them are black people. A lot of blue collar people are also black people.
And it's important to remember that the reason why these things are happening has nothing to do with the color of the person's skin, but it has to do with class. So even though the two things may be interconnected, only one of them is actually
it has
a valid reason.
I think what Armin's saying is it has to do with both. Like does, the class and thing, they're interconnected, and that's why there's the whole Obama versus Trump thing. That does have to do with the color of the skin. Yet both of them did get elected. Obama was held to a much higher standard. Obviously, Trump is obviously not really held to that much of a standard. But that difference. So that's where the class and the race thing sort of interconnect.
I mean, if there is studies that show, I don't know if these studies are peer reviewed, so please correct me if this is wrong. But resumes
wrong.
Okay, sorry. But resumes that were sent to people with the same qualification but different names that suggested different races, the response rates to the ones names that sounded more white were much higher. So if you don't get a job because you're not white, then your class is going to be affected by the fact that you're not getting much higher paying job.
You know what, Armin? You're right. And so what ended up happening was we overcorrected. And that's where we are right now. We're in the overcorrection phase. So now we're
on both sides,
Yeah. So now what ends up happening is if you have a hijab on, or if you have an ethnic sounding name, or if you have darker skin, then people are you're going to be first in line now because we're trying to fix what we did. But now we've, like I said, overcorrected.
I would try to adjust it a little bit. We didn't correct it at all. We have false corrections, I would say, because those problems it's not like we corrected it and then we went overboard.
No, you're right.
We didn't solve this.
We're going about it the wrong way. We're going about solving it in the wrong way.
Again, I think it's a little bit of both. I think there is some correction, there's some overcorrection, there's some false correction.
Right.
Like there are many things that have been corrected. There are things that were horrible just as little as 10 to 15 years ago that are much better now. But at the same time, we do overshoot and we do misshoot.
And that's something, you know what? We should pat ourselves on the back for that, because that's something I do not see in the Arab world, in the Middle East, where I lived, in Africa, or my international students that I speak to. There are a lot of countries in this world that aren't even at the point where they realize that this is an issue that needs to be corrected. They're still at the point where it's totally fine and dandy to judge people based on their color of their skin. Yeah, Armin, you've talked about this a lot in Iran with the racism against Arabs. So at least here, we may be making mistakes and overcorrecting, et cetera, or not correcting, or whatever the case may be. But at least we're aware that this is an issue, and at least we're trying to work on it. So I think that there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that actually is that I remember when I first went to Pakistan, I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I was in American school with people from like 80 different countries. So I grew up with lots and lots of different cultures and ideas and skin colors and everything. And then I went to Pakistan. Everybody had the same race. And I was like, wow, what a racist place. And then I realized the majority of the world is like in Iran, like they're mainly Persians. There are elements to a national identity that are connected to ethnicity, or connected to race, or connected to certain sort of phenotypic or anatomical characteristics. Whereas you come to Canada or the US, and it's not, the national identity is not connected to that. It's actually connected to, it's about immigrants. It's about people coming from Europe and then from all these other places. And so the way that people, these are countries where the national identity is based on values and ideals.
Which is...
Yeah, go on. Sorry, Kate.
Go ahead, Katie. Sorry.
I was just going to say that's how it should be.
Yeah.
Like that's how, that's the right way, where people are coming together based on who they are, not what they look like, or, how they were born into whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck all in the end.
Yeah.
So should I ask the question? Oh, you had a question, Armin? I was going to ask the patient.
No, I'm just going to give like one thing I would give like credit to the left on this is that, some of these ideas are going to other countries. One thing, for example, I noticed was this leftist in United States, she was half Filipino, and now she went back in Philippines, and she's horrified by how much people hate darker skins, right? And people associate beauty with only light skin, and she's trying to bring some of that ideas of, you could be beautiful and dark skinned in the Philippines, which these are some, like, as much as we point out how ridiculous sometimes the left gets, I think there are points that they are bringing that are helpful. I mean, so many girls in Philippines are dark skinned, and they're desperately always trying to become whiter and whiter and whiter. And somebody coming into to them and telling them there's a lot of, there's nothing wrong with being dark skinned. You shouldn't be, this is not something you should be down with. And that's a good thing to bring to introduce their community.
Yeah, that's great. So what you're describing is somebody who's progressive and who is not regressive. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let me ask you the question from one of the patrons who I don't really understand what this question is asking. So, but I'm just going to read it verbatim. It says, so it's for you, Katie, what to do when you are starting to get jaded, when you're feeling alone on your belief, talking to the other side seems not worth the stress.
Right. Okay. So it is hard. It's very difficult when you realize that, like, all my friends would probably hate me if they knew, how I feel about this versus how they feel about this, about, an issue or whatever. But I think that most people, like, fingers crossed, aren't complete assholes, and they're willing to kind of put the differences aside as long as, like, you still value good things. Like, but there are some people that better than to touch those issues around, and it's just better to just zip it in those cases. I have to do that quite a bit because, I'm a bit of like a firecracker, and I have to learn to not, because I'm going to probably get myself hurt one day. So yeah, no, it does get lonely, I guess. I've actually, in the past year, I've met a lot of people who kind of have had the same transformation as me. So that's good. I do have some really long-term friends that are super, lefty and very, social justice warrior-esque, but they are, I guess, I just don't really talk about those things with them if I can avoid it.
Yeah.
Can I wanted to ask you, speaking of your friends, do you find that dealing with people with opposing ideas online versus in person, do you find a difference between the quality of the dialogue? Because I've noticed this, like I have, when you argue with people they just won't speak to you because you disagree on something.
Yeah.
But when you're friends with them and you're speaking in person, and you're seeing the other person's face and you're seeing their expressions, you tend to have a very different way of going about things. I mean, do you find the same? Did you have friends in person that are coming from an opposite ideological standpoint that you find valuable spending time with them?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I mean, living in the Pacific Northwest, you're pretty hard pressed to come by, conservative people for the most part. So I would have no friends if I was like, can't learn anything from these people, but I just try and, whatever. I have a friend, and she identifies as an anarcho-communist, but she's like the sweetest person ever. And she is like one of the few people.
Anarcho-communist?
No, I don't know. It's just like anarchy and communism. I don't know. It's not my bag, but she's really nice, and she's always been very open to, just like my ideas, even though, she's like polar opposite from me. And yeah, I still feel that she has interesting things to say. I'm not going to write them off just on the basis that, she's on this side, because she's still, I don't know. I don't like the hive mind mentality,
I feel like if we did act like that, if we, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say regarding the social media versus, in-person conversations, it's kind of half and half. Sometimes people are more receptive online, I find, than in person. One time, okay, really, I'll just condense the story. It was during the BC election, so they were all trying to
take your time, though. You don't have to condense it.
Yeah. I just feel bad when someone starts talking and then I start fucking talking.
You're the guest.
Just go on. You're the guest.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be talking.
It was during the election, the provincial election, and I went over to a friend's house and we were watching the results. And I remember somehow the topic of like Islam came up, right? And this was a guy who, okay, so there's like some sort of Christian like labor like union or something. It's called like, I want to say, oh my God, I was going to say CUC. I think it's called CLAC. And it's like some just Christian dudes, like the fucking union, right? And they've got these rules they have to abide by. And this guy, my friend, he was like so outraged once someone came to his house. He was part of this union. He wanted to kick him out. But anyways, you know, the topic of Islam, you know, he's gotta, you know, send out the virtue signal and act like all is fine and dandy. And I started to talk about, in vague terms, Yasmin's story. And he literally said, I don't feel comfortable talking about this. When I started to say, I was like, well, if you think that Islam isn't as terrible as, you know, this, and you don't like Christianity. And I started to say, you know, that it's a toxic religion as well. That does not mean hating the people at all. It just means like recognizing harmful things that the text preaches and stuff. And I was just trying to say, you know, you want to say it's all peace and love, but like, that's just not the case for millions of people around the world. And he pretty much just was like, I really don't feel comfortable talking about this. And I was like, oh, fuck off. He's a nice guy, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous though.
That is the definition of regressive for those who, just to expand on what Yas said before, is the whole idea that, for instance, if you find something really homophobic or misogynistic or racist or, you know, endorsing slavery in the Bible and you think that it's terrible.
Oh, yeah.
At the same time, when you find that in the Quran, you're like, oh, no, we can't criticize this because it's their religion, their culture. When you do that, that is regressive. And the reason it's regressive is because then it's not about the ideas. It's about where the idea is coming from or who is expressing the idea, which lends itself to identity politics. That's the only way to go. Then you
okay, devil's advocate on this. Maybe what if I say, yeah, but I wouldn't be focusing on criticizing Christians if I was in Egypt, for example, because in Egypt, Christians are discriminated against. So there's a place and time for all these criticisms.
Yeah.
So the reason why I don't want to, I focus on Christians in the United States and not on Muslims is because I don't want to give ammunition to people that are targeting Muslims. If I was in Egypt, maybe then I would have been focusing on Islam, but not on Christians, because in that situation, Christians are discriminated against. What would you say to that?
Right. Okay. Well, I think that we should never shy away from ideas just because, oh, it could cause, like, you know, you can't really think that way. Like, oh, just saying this verbally, it could cause someone to go out and attack. Like, I mean, I've dealt with that before where I feel responsible. And for that reason, I've not spoken about things that I, you know, could have been spoken about just because I don't want there to be backlash. And what if someone, you know, uses this to justify hatred or whatever. But I don't know, like you said, the US, like the thing is that Canada, where we are, like it is very secular. So we don't have, you know, the Republican, not that I'm like, you know, vehemently anti-Republican or anything like that, but we don't have the sort of like, Christian values, like kind of meddling into the legislation or the attempt to do so anyways. Right. So, I mean, if someone were to say like, oh, Christians are causing such a problem in Canada, I'd be like, well, you know, I'm pretty much like an anti-theist, but they're not really like the laws, like there's gay marriages, like all those things that are the really, like extreme, like Christian, like Bible thumper people would be against. They're all legal here. So I don't really think that.
And on the other hand, you've got Justin Trudeau, by the way, and I should say, who I actually like when it comes to everything else. I know that you guys disagree with me on it, but the stuff that he's doing, the apologism for FGM and for, you know, going into that mosque and addressing the women in the back, and some of that stuff is just so infuriating.
Yeah,
it's tough to watch. So,
okay, so here's another question from a patron. Kate, is there a more refined way to address the issues usually championed by SJWs, or is there a media personality who has an approach that you admire?
That's a good question. Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with the second half of that question first. Philip DeFranco, he's a YouTuber that kind of like, does news stuff. And I like him a lot. He's pretty objective. He actually leans slightly like conservative, but you wouldn't know it really just from like, the way he speaks and, his input on things. I really think that he's kind of one of the best. He tries his best to be like non-biased, and he takes on, the SJW stuff sometimes, but he also takes on, I don't know. He's probably one of the more reasonable people that I can think of off the top of my head. And okay, so a more refined way to address the issues championed by them. Okay, so like I'm trying to think of an issue. Okay, for example, let's say like transphobia or something. Probably, because, I don't really I think there's like a real, line between, wanting to be accepting and having things be fair for everyone. And like, for example, I've read articles that say if you're not, actively seeking out like trans dating partners.
Yeah, I read that too.
That's like, like, what the fuck is that? No one has the right to someone else's body. Like, you're not entitled to date someone.
If you don't date Black people, it means you're racist.
Yeah, there's a difference between, treating, like, allowing people to have equal opportunities, in housing and jobs and just be treated equal in society. That doesn't carry over to who you're, like, fucking. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, when they focus on those stupid things, then it's like, okay, like, this is fucking total non-issue. But
I've heard people say that I don't want to, like, I've heard a lot of women say, I don't want to date a guy who's shorter than me. Like,
well, that's my boyfriend's an expert.
Yeah, it's like when you're choosing somebody to date, you are actually allowed to discriminate because
it's choice.
Yes, it's like it is, and it's sick to try
all the time. Yeah,
it's like if you don't eat octopus, you hate octopi. Well, I just don't want to. They're great creatures. I just don't want to eat them.
Exactly. Yeah. That's one of the things that comes up a lot. And I'm like, there's a much bigger issue. We could focus on, hate crimes and stuff. No, we're going to focus on,
Yeah, taking it too far. Okay. If we've got another one now, can we stop referring to regressive leftists as far left? The name itself infers that they are not being truly liberal, because they're not. Or you give liberalism a bad rap when you call regressives epitome of liberalism. I don't think we ever called progressives epitome of liberalism.
To quote Majid, who identifies as a liberal and who stands for liberal values, actually coined the term regressive left. To paraphrase him, actually, because I can't remember the exact quote. He actually says that the left, when we talk about the regressive left, we're not talking about the entire left. We're talking about a subsect of people on the left who don't adhere to liberal values yet claim they do.
That's right. They're actually illiberal.
So that's, I don't think that there's basis to that.
All right. So, Katie, can you tell us what are some suggestions that you can give us? Like, how can you deprogram an SJW? Is there like a 12-step program or something? What worked for you? What were the arguments that broke through? Like, I know you mentioned Blair White and Philip DeFranco, but do you remember specifically, like, what were the things that they said that broke through your concrete barrier there?
Good question. Okay.
Like, that moment of cognitive, like just when it, like that friend of yours that you were mentioning, when has all this stuff to say about Christianity, and you're like, well, what about another Abrahamic religion? Yeah. And then he was like, I cannot handle this. So, I'm sure because I know I went through that when I started to realize that Islam was one big fat lie. So it hurts. It like physically hurts. You're like, oh my God, you're like, what's his name? Neo in the Matrix, where you're like, all of a sudden, everything that you thought was real and true is not. So to get past that barrier, to get past that pain of that, do you remember that moment, or was it not a moment and just a series of moments?
Yeah, it was kind of a series of moments. I want to say it was kind of starting a little bit like in the summer of 2016. I was starting to have doubts about a few different things that were going on in the media and whatever. But I still, clung to whatever. I was sharing stupid ass posts every day. And, then, it kind of, I guess, was like a culmination of all those kind of things that were just brewing in my head. And then I started, like I said, exposing myself to kind of the different points of view a bit. And actually, okay, so one of the biggest turning points for me was when, so I have a friend who, she shared a couple articles back in 2016. She shared, I think it was like a Lauren Southern one, and then another one, just shared them to her page or whatever. She shared a thing about transgenders and then, the non-binary and how everyone is. Yeah. And she wasn't really putting, any, spin on it. She wasn't expressing her thoughts, just kind of sharing articles. And what ended up happening is, she ran a group called Broke People Trying to Save Money. And it was just sales and oh, you can get fireworks. She posts stuff like that. Right. So anyways, this one girl didn't like something she posted, and she tagged over 20 or 30 people and was like, hey, she posted this, and they all were bashing her for posting articles. It was so horrible. And she was feeling suicidal after. She was feeling so terrible about herself. And these are social justice warriors. These are people they're all for tolerance and kindness and acceptance. Yet they're fucking going it was one of the meanest things ever. And it kind of made me be wow, these people are really fucking shitty. It's under the guise of social justice and equality, but they're not very nice people to encounter. So that kind of made me be maybe I should reevaluate some of the things that, I'm very adamant on.
That's great to hear. I like to hear that. On a completely different scale, it reminds me of how ISIS really is causing a lot more ex-Muslims than anything else.
Yeah.
Because a lot of Muslims are looking to this and they're like, what? Is that what my religion is all about? That's what happens when we have a caliphate? What am I identifying myself as? What is this group that I'm a part of? And then it makes them sort of, take a second look at it and realize that they don't want to be a part of this group.
Well, yes, actually, that's a very good point. A lot of times, because they want to go say to people that this is actually not Islam, so they go and look into it to prove to you that this is not Islam. And then when they look into it, they're like, "Holy shit, this is actually Islam."
Yeah, yeah. I know people always want to pull a no true Scotsman when it comes to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing. I think it's happening. We talk about this. People talk about the rise of the alt-right and, and then the Richard Spencers and even all of the, the Trump stuff. And I'm like, it's good that, something sort of lit up fire under the asses of people who were getting really complacent and comfortable. And they're sitting here talking about the 72 different genders. And then they realize, holy shit, we're back in the fucking 50s. Now, we've got white identitarians and this and that. So there was in a way, I think it's good. It's woken up a lot of people who weren't speaking up before are, and it's the same kind of thing that's happening in the Muslim world. And I hear it all the time when people everyone's like, yeah, we want a more religious society, more Sharia, more Sharia. Those are all the polls from 10 years ago. And then all this stuff starts happening, and suddenly they end up enabling, sometimes unwittingly, groups like ISIS, and they come up. And because there was a poll in Pakistan actually, where I think many years ago, around 40% of people said that yes, it's okay to they thought it was justified to kill innocent people if they're infidels. And then what happened is that ISIS came along and the Taliban came along, and suddenly these Muslims who'd voted in that poll were considered infidels by them. This is no true Scotsman. These aren't the real Muslims. Now they started becoming a target. Now that number in Pakistan is 3%.
Nice.
Right. Wow. So this is, and this is with the same polling agency. So there's sometimes you do need people to, you need to expose people to the reality of, what they're fantasizing about
But Ali, it's not. The results is not always that great because, for example, when it comes to the alt-right and this white supremacists in the West, I do feel like the regressive left was largely responsible for these groups.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I'm saying.
I know, but then when they're responsible for people like Trump and the rise of the alt-right, you point to them and like, look, this is the result of your PC culture, right? And instead of looking at it and thinking like, yeah, maybe we should have talked to these people instead of just silencing everybody, they're actually doubling down and saying, look, these are the people that we warned you about. We were right. Right? And we were right. See, we have a huge white supremacy problem. So you guys didn't take us seriously. Now you should take us more seriously.
There's a bit
right.
of both.
Yeah, there is a bit of both. And that is a good point. But I think overall, the larger effect around, and I'm talking about if you go to workplaces and stuff and you kind of get out of Twitter and the online sort of social media world, which is really, again, it's a minority of it. But if you go out, there are people who have become very conscious about these things. I mean, the stuff that I used to talk about 10 years ago, the liberal siding with Islam and, being apologetic towards it, people are a lot more receptive to the idea that there is a problem with Islamic fundamentalism now. I mean, I'm talking about liberals and like Canadian liberals here than there ever were before. So I think there has been that awareness. And a lot of the rise of, not necessarily the alt-right, but some of these sort of anti-SJWs has been emblematic. Yeah. And people like yourself, Katie, who used to be a certain way and who've changed. I've met a lot of people like that. And some of them have gone completely, over the other edge. And, and there are some people who are more measured. Some people still identify as liberal, but they call out that one aspect, like the Bill Maher type. And again, Armin and I are, I always see the donut. Armin sees the hole.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, so Armin likes to see.
I like finding donuts.
No, if you start pointing out the negative, I'll point out the positive.
No. I know, Armin. I'm just
Armin. He just likes to be contrary.
No, but it's good. That's what
I'm trying to give our audience all the sides.
Balance.
Well, that's why I love this podcast. Mm-hmm. That's why it's so much fun.
But I do think, here's another devil's advocate, not a devil. I do think you dismiss social media too much, though, because you think it's a minority thing. I actually think social media represents what people think more than real life. Because in real life, you're afraid of giving voice to your opinions. On social media, you just let it out there. And and I think if for every conversation that people are having offline, there's 100 conversations that people are having online. And I think
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the people who don't want to express their views in public are more likely to go on social media because then they don't have to worry about it. So
that's why you get a more realistic. That's why I think social media gives you a more realistic view of what people's opinions are. Because people are not holding back.
Some people's opinions. So what happens is, for instance, if you come to my workplace and you look at got 700 people who I work with, almost all of them have a Twitter account and have a Facebook account. But very few of them know what's happening in the midterm elections. Very few of them are politicals. Very few of them are as involved in the issues that we are. Most of them are just kind of into shoes and
but that's also
a new restaurant.
And outside off, not real life, offline people.
Those are the people who've been woken up, right? That's what I'm talking about.
But I just don't want to dismiss social media as not real life because social media is part of life.
No. I wouldn't say it's not real life. I'm just saying that there is a little bit of it's a small subsect,
right?
And it's very powerful. It's not let's not forget the people with unpopular opinions often end up more on social media. They won't say them out loud. And a lot of you could argue that is a lot of what led to the rise of the alt-right. That's a lot of what led to Trump being elected, for instance. But there's also the slumber of the large silent majority who just kind of sits and just chills and I'll just stay home.
Yeah.
I'm not going to vote. I'm more concerned about these gender pronouns, right? There's also that aspect. That is the large segment of people that I think have been woken up. Or in the Muslim world, it's the people who thought, oh no, we want to be religious, more pious. My beard is longer than yours. My hijab covers more of my hair than yours does. And then suddenly, next thing you know, someone's being thrown off the rooftop, or your Shia friend's having his head chopped off in the middle of the street, and you're like, okay, well maybe. I took this too far.
And I feel like that's what's happening with kids these days that are going too far on the left and are now proud to call themselves communists. I'm like,
oh my God.
You guys, it wasn't that long ago. You should have learned about this in school. It's not like you don't know what happens or we don't know where it leads. We know where it leads. So how can you, you're talking about Muslims that had no idea that it was going to lead to this. And so they're like, yeah, Sharia, yeah, whatever. And now they see it in real life and they're like, holy shit, actually changed my mind. But there's no reason for kids these days, honestly, to be identifying as communists. I'm like, are you like, we have really failed them if they think that that's a good thing.
No, it's crazy. Even on
talking about kids these days. Our fucking prime minister. Okay, sorry. Go on.
But even on the right, like these are the people like Reagan fought the Cold War, and now there's such a high percentage of them that are pro-Russia. Yeah. Like, it's insane. Like the Putin, people who like Putin and like Russia, including like people in the administration, like Michael Flynn and all this.
And this is like the 80s, you guys. It's not like,
Yeah, it's almost like they're, I really think, people talk about
imagine 20 years from now, people in the government also have like with jihadis, like getting, these jihadi people, like we have to.
That's happening now already. Let's give them some finger painting and some poetry. They're our friends.
Well, as for the communism thing, it's again, the no true Scotsman fallacy comes to the rescue, because ask anyone who likes communism or identifies as a communist, they'll tell you, well, true communism has never been implemented. And that's the end of it. You can't, there's no, like, they're just.
Muslims say the exact same thing.
It can't be implemented. It's just like, the whole thing's insane.
How many millions of people have to die before you're like, okay, maybe it can't be implemented? Maybe it's a very ideology.
One of the most important subjects to teach in schools is it really is history. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what you have is, you have people who are kind of just focused on the stuff that they need to know to get a job. Right, so you have people who are physicians who know nothing about economics. You have people who are economists who know nothing about basic healthcare, anything like that, the humanities. So, you have, and people don't know about history. Just a couple of generations go by. I mean, people are like, oh, so, Barack Obama got elected, first black president, big deal. Who cares? Or communism. I read a book about it. It seems pretty good. What's the problem?
The t-shirts are cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There is a lot of this really has to do with the kind of sub specialization that we've gone into when it comes to education, where people really are just sort of one trick ponies in a way.
There's
Go ahead. I was going to say, we only learn about our own histories too. We don't learn about the history of like world. Anyway, go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So there's actually, it's horrifying to see, but there is a tag group on Facebook, and it's Stalin did nothing wrong, but okay. And it's not ironic. It is tankies is what they call them. They think that Stalin was, and they think that, North Korea is actually like a haven of, good things. They think that it's all like U.S. imperialist propaganda that these atrocities and all this shit's happening.
Send them to North Korea. Let's send them there.
I know, right? It's like, all right, go.
Free ticket.
See how it goes.
Yeah,
actually, I don't know. If they go to North Korea and they have Westerners that are defending North Korea, they might be treated very nicely, actually.
It's disheartening to say the least. It's like it's hard to deal with. Someone tried to say that I was one of those ones. I was like, are you fucking kidding? I'm like, this is where I showed them my, what is it, Spectre or something.com. It shows like your economic and all your shit. And it showed where I was like, really? I was like, you think that I like love Joseph Stalin?
Yeah.
The fact that people, that doesn't get as much, if, saying Stalin did nothing wrong doesn't get as much attention as if you said, hit as it as
oh my god
Hitler didn't do anything wrong.
If somebody
even though Stalin killed way more people,
killed like 3 times as many, I think, or even more.
And this shows how much people are obsessed with Nazism being the only form of pure evil, right?
Yeah.
And this is like has become one of the original sins of the white man, and nothing could be as bad as Nazism, and even if suggesting it is considered like something very, you can't.
Well, Stalin did sort of join forces with the rest of us to defeat Hitler, right? So that's also another little bit of thing that.
But that
everybody's
that
on the same side.
I know.
So that also colors it to some extent, but it's crazy. Like he killed way more people. It was much worse.
Yeah, and more than him, Genghis Khan. Guys, one thing I actually say to when I'm arguing against the social justice warriors, something I say that even the people that were defending me against the social justice warriors are like, what is, white people actually are responsible for ending racism.
Yep.
Racism,
well, not ending it, but working on starting to eradicate it.
Well, ending it in many places, right? I mean, so people say white people should apologize for slavery. Maybe if you look at it actually historically, slavery was a norm everywhere until white people decided that this shouldn't be a thing.
And white people died in order to eradicate slavery from the United States. And it was white politicians. This is what I keep on saying.
Is that too extreme to say? That
no, it's not. I would focusing on the whole and focusing on the donut. People are focusing on the whole. And I'm like, yes, but the whole world was doing it. And it was the West.
But if there's no whole, it wouldn't be
a major devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Like in the sense that I think that there were, like, if I start something and it wasn't, you're right, like the slavery was something that was done all over the world. It was everywhere. But everybody had a part to play in it. But I really think that it was the people who were slaves who got up and they had their own leaders and they fought for their own rights. They helped. They did. Like there's a...
Of course, though.
Yeah,
no,
but
you're absolutely correct. But they would not have been able to do it without the help of white American. I mean, if we're only talking about America right now,
actually, not Americans. Actually, yes, it was mostly the British, right?
Yeah,
the
British. Yes, for sure. And I mean, it did start. America was one of the last places in the West to stop slavery, but we always forget when we talk about it like a black versus white issue in the States. People don't want to mention the fact that without the support of white devils, it wouldn't have happened.
It was actually an extreme suggestion when the British Empire decided that this shouldn't be a thing. Like the world was like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is the norm everywhere, right? And the thing is that the British Empire, Ali, you're saying it was the slaves, the slaves in America, the slaves everywhere have been trying to, for many thousands of years, they rose against their masters.
But they're not going to get anywhere.
But it didn't end slavery. It was when the masters decided, and the masters, the white masters decided that, okay, this is not good, right? Not only slavery shouldn't be a thing, we're going to make other people stop it as well. That's what the British Empire said. The British Empire said, we're going to stop slavery and we're going to force other people that we want to deal with to stop it as well. And that's what ended in many places.
And that's what the reason why a lot of conservative Muslims, my mother included, consider Saudi Arabia a sellout to the West. It was because they finally stopped slavery in 1965. And when they did that, a lot of conservative Muslims were like, how could you do that? Slavery is halal. So in Islam, you're allowed to do it. So if you're going to come and say you're not allowed to do it because of pressure from the West, so you're a sellout and you're no longer a real Islamic country. And there's now in Libya, it's still happening where people are being bought and sold.
And in China, people don't recognize in prison, people are in forced labor in China. People don't recognize it as slavery, but that's slavery. So in China, it's a big deal in China as well. Kate, you're back. Kate, can you, Alex was wondering the person that you mentioned, who was it? Who was she talking about?
Philip DeFranco.
Philip DeFranco, okay. All right, and there's another question by Alex. Are there any social or political issues that Kate is now more concerned with that she wasn't before, aside from Islam? Like,
yep. One thing that I never thought about before because I was just in the clouds is like the economy and stuff like that. I thought that I remember like so stupidly telling my dad when I was younger, this should be the least important thing. And I listed all these social justice issues that, should come first. And now I realize, people fucking need jobs. Like people need to.
How are we going to pay for all those social justice things?
Exactly. If people aren't okay? So this is one of the things that, a lot of the really hardcore environmentalists are like, no, we go to, in BC, there's all these projects, right? That they're wanting to stop the Site C dam and then pipelines and all of that. And they also, this is like the NDP for you. No offense if any of you guys like the NDP, but provincially at least, they want to halt all these projects, right? They want to not have them because they're not environmentally sound or whatever. And but they also want all these social programs. Well, people don't have jobs. They can't pay their taxes, which these social programs can't happen. So it's just, yeah, I'm definitely more concerned about economic issues than I used to be. And I used to think that we should just, hand out. Now I think a little bit more about
I think you and Eiley are on the same page when it comes to the environmental issues. Right, Eiley?
Mm-hmm. Well, which parts of them? I'm kind of all over the place on the environmental issues.
Well, like I grew up in my dad worked in the oil rigs always, and they are bad. I'm not going to say they're not. This shit is not bad for the environment because it is. But all those people protesting, they too use oil, and we need to. We'd be fucked. We'd all die. Like we use it to heat our home, everything. So
yeah, my whole thing with the oil thing is that I think it's a necessary bridge to the transition during the transition.
Absolutely.
So that's the only time I really support it. When people talk about drilling here or actually using more fossil fuels here rather than importing it from Saudi Arabia, I think that's a good national security move.
Absolutely.
At least do that. But at the same time, invest in renewable energy.
Yeah. That's why I actually voted for the Green Party.
No, you did. Listen, that's what I mean by being all over the place on it. I think that if we're going to get to renewable energy, it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. But that's why I'm so anti Saudi Arabia.
So between now and then, since we do have to have a little bit of a transitory phase with fossil fuels, might as well do that ourselves in a safe way that's more regulated.
Yeah,
totally agree.
To do it in a way that funds, fundamentalists.
Well, that's
even if it's going to cost us more, it's totally worth it if we're basically saving lives.
Well, I think it should be regulated very.
Yeah, it's like it's quite frankly sick how I guess unconcerned people are about, like I said, the whole Saudi Arabia thing. It's like you really want to be giving excessive amounts of money to a nation that is doing
Trudeau, the feminist.
Yeah, fucking, yeah.
It was like a $500 billion deal that he made.
Yeah.
Oh, the 15. But that was actually, everybody's responsible for that. That was Harper. Like, he actually started that deal. Trudeau completed it.
Yes.
This was
Nobody's going to say it. We all do that. The US does it as well. The UK does it as well. Like we're all doing it. We're all in bed.
Yeah, all of it. The Trump, Obama, every single one of them. They've all done it. And they have to, because honestly, if you don't kiss Saudi ass, then your country's economy is going to collapse. Right now, that's the situation. The only way to get off of that situation is stop being dependent on foreign oil.
Well, guys,
my dad used to...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. Totally. If we're moving forward, the story is not relevant. I'll just...
No. You tell your story. It's good.
Oh, I was just going to say, my dad, he has worked in a few different Muslim theocracies, right? Because he worked in oil and gas. So he worked in Algeria. He worked in... He worked a few different places. And so he's always been pretty realistic about these things and how very different things are. So...
And I think that's the thing. People just don't get that. It's so hard to explain to somebody because we are where we are.
Yeah.
And they really assume that the whole world has moved in the same direction in the same amount of time.
Yeah.
And they just cannot fathom that that the rest of the world has not moved in the same direction as us. Nearly at the same speed. They think that we're all the same and we all think the same and we all feel the same. I'm like, even us, like even when I was growing up, so I'm talking like in the 80s and 90s, people were still super homophobic, super sexist. Yeah. That was totally normal.
Yeah.
And so how can, like, if we've progressed that much in such a short amount of time, but they, like, we wouldn't even recognize ourselves from the 80s. So they can't get that there are huge pockets of this planet where, no, you're not going to recognize the way they think. You're not going to be able to wrap your head around, their value system is completely different from where we are. They think that's racist or something to say that when it's just truth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's as racist to say that about the West just 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, fuck. I think I tagged you in a comment, like, I want to say it was like 3 days, like maybe a week ago. Oh. And a woman was commenting on, what was it? Oh, it was about the reintegration program that Justin Trudeau is proposing for these fucking people coming.
The ISIS people.
Yeah. And so this woman commented and she said something to the effect of, oh, ISIS was made by the CIA. This is all just a hoax
it was the Jews.
Yeah. This is all just a hoax to, incite hatred towards refugees and Muslims and blah, blah, blah. And
wow, that's quite the hoax. It's very detailed.
This woman was saying, she was saying, I'm First Nations and the real terrorists are like the white people and this, and this stuff isn't happening. And I commented and I said, is your head, how fucking far is your head up your ass? You really think that just because you don't see these things going on, that they're not happening? Like, I was like, I can't even believe how fucking willfully ignorant you are. It just pissed me off because it was like, just because you're not seeing this shit happen in your own backyard does not mean that millions of people all over the world aren't suffering.
That's why I want to send all of these people to Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And, I just want to go see it. Go.
This is a problem with the extreme polarization is that, if you're First Nations, you're obviously going to have a problem with the history of, white people come to your land. But then what you do is you take all of these other people who are also doing really horrible things, and you think they're completely blameless because of what you went through. So you're looking at everything very telescopically.
From your perspective.
Yeah. Do we have a guest waiting for us for the next episode? Because we should start that. So.
Yeah, we do.
But Katie, are you in the Atheist Republic Vancouver consulate? Because if not, you should join that. Because
I don't think so.
Okay, we have a Vancouver. We have Atheist Republic has a chapter in every major city. So if you want to, it would be great to have you there. Because I kind of also, if you have interested in like starting events and stuff, because that group could use some more activity.
Okay.
Look for I'll send you the link to the Vancouver chapter and consider joining it.
Okay, sure.
So, Katie, do you want us to share your social media with this video if there's anybody that wants to get in touch with you, or you're not interested?
I don't really think anyone will want to, but so it's probably good.
No, people are already asking how. Yeah.
People are already asking how they can get in touch with you.
How can they find you on Facebook?
You can send them the link to my profile.
Okay.
Somebody mentioned that they think that you were on Ruben. They said that they recognize your face, and like
no.
I told him all white people look the same. That's
racist thing to say. Because she's white, she was on Ruben.
I wish.
All right. Well, it was great having you on. Thank you so much. I hope that we had some progressive left SJW people hopefully are willing to listen to this episode and willing to hear you speak and possibly learn from you. And you know what? If I ever get any SJW crazies on my page, I'm just going to send them right to you. How's that sound?
Sounds good. I'm well equipped to deal with them.
Perfect. I'll be like, Katie, fix them.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Good to talk to you, Katie. Take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the gracious support of the Illuminati and the great state of Israel. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. In the meantime, we greatly appreciate the support of our current donors. Please consider supporting by sharing the podcast with your fellow heathens or by donating at patreon.com/SJME.